All right, recording is started, and this is the October 21st, 2021 Crossplane community meeting. We've got a lot going on here in the community and with the upcoming 1.5 release. So let's jump on into it. And so typically here we go through releases, upcoming releases, roadmap, status type of stuff first for the core Crossplane project and the providers also. And then after that, we have a more broader community focus section where we can get some updates on things going on in the community. And then, maybe some questions answered and things like that. And then the final section is more technical focus. So we can go through like specific PRs. We can do more deep dives into some of the technical content. And so some of that stuff could be optional and folks can drop off if that's not specifically relevant to them. But that's the general flow of the agenda here that we typically go through. So let's start with releases then. So 1.5 is coming up and very soon. And the release date, as we've had planned this entire time with our typical release cadence of every 8 weeks, will be October 26th, which is next week. And so I saw Muafik put together the release checklist issue just yesterday or so. So we've got that going and we are nearing getting ready to cut the release and do all the steps there. That process is pretty well defined now, so don't expect any surprises. So the release should be smooth, but let's dig into maybe what's left or some unfinished loose ends that we need to wrap up before the release. So I'll bring up the project board. And I myself have not updated this, so I may have some stale things. I don't know if other folks have touched it here, but I think right now it's less about what's in the release and more about what's not yet finished, or maybe things that we need to put some attention on so that they can make the release. I think that we're in a code freeze sort of thing here, but let's see if there's anything outstanding still. So any thoughts on that?
I have some updates on the in progress there. The Credential Providers one, we hit pause on for a moment because there's probably a better way to do it, but it involves fixing some upstream dependencies. So I don't think that will make it in. The custom certificate authorities, I gave that a review today and it's pretty much ready to go, but it's a fairly large feature change. So that also won't go in, obviously. I did want to mention one PR, but I'll bring it up in the patches section, but it's not mentioned here, so I'll go ahead and drag it
in. Is it the one that you wrote with the hand parameter during installation?
Yep, that's correct.
Yeah, I just added that issue under review in progress.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I'll defer that to the patches section because I think it's a larger topic.
Yep.
Okay, that sounds good then. Yeah, so we're probably heading with the release next week and being in code freeze right now. We don't anticipate major things still landing, but if anybody needs support or anything for the release for next Tuesday, then we should definitely raise a flag and raise a hand, and we'll get together to to make sure that things are smooth heading into the release. Muafik, are you intending to run the release then, since you created the release checklist and stuff, or was somebody else wanting to get more involved this time?
Yeah, we haven't really made the decision. We will have the sprint planning after this community meeting, so there we will decide. One thing I want to ask Daniel actually, so that the second one under to do promoting control config to v1 beta 1. Is this something that we can is this something that I can just go ahead and do it to be included in the release?
I don't think so. I mean, I like, this is just my opinion. So, this isn't set in stone. I don't personally feel comfortable with the API of the controller config. It's very widely used and it's fairly effective at what it does. But it concerns me that it's kind of like a catch-all resource right now that feels like we're just kind of putting stuff into. So I'm definitely in favor of leaving it as V1 Alpha 1, unless if someone else feels super strongly against that.
I'm kind of sorry, just join the call. Hello. I'm mostly on the same page as Dan, but I don't think this is urgent at the moment, but maybe sometime in the time frame of the next release, as in the one after the one on Tuesday, 1.6, it would be good to have a plan about this, because we don't want to leave it in V1 Alpha 1 indefinitely. Maybe we could just start by looking and see if there's any features that it has that we would promote to like provider or something like that as a first class field. Not sure.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I feel like that this is very related to some of my desire for us to not have deployments as the only thing that can be spit out as something that runs a controller, which this is obviously very, very tied to the deployment API. So yeah, it might be good for me to open up some issues describing that.
Yeah, there's nothing tracking it specifically yet, but also thinking about a similar issue for composition revisions to promote them to V1 Beta 1, so that we're just tracking issues generally, so the stuff don't stay in V1 Alpha 1 forever. So definitely would be good for controller config as well to get community feedback. So if anyone has any thoughts on it, or I'll try and post something on Slack afterwards, or soliciting input on it. Dan, have you captured that thought about the variable of wanting to support packages that aren't deployments? I know we've talked about it, but just if the community is giving input, it would be good for them to have that sort of in mind.
I'll make a note on this issue and then try to get something written up, at least as a placeholder for where maybe some specific discussion around that that's more focused to that effort can take place as well.
Yeah, just a placeholder is fine for the moment, just so that people have the information they need to think about it.
All right. Yeah, so it looks like then we're have most things in place for 1.5, and so we will be running that release next week. And if there aren't any further thoughts on 1.5, then we can go ahead, I think, and move on to the patch releases that Dan wanted to bring up here.
Yeah, thanks, Jared. So there's a PR open that I will have updated shortly for Move Off It to give final review on. But essentially, we had an issue where the version name is causing problems because when you supply packages that you want to be installed as part of the Crossplane installation, the naming schema takes the full package source. So that would be something like crossplane/provider-aws:v0.19.0. And it basically normalizes that without stripping the version off of it. So what that means is if you update your either existing Crossplane installation with a home upgrade, or you upgrade to a new Crossplane installation, and in either of those operations, you change the version of one of your providers, we don't just update the provider that's already in place, whether it was installed previously via Helm or not. We actually go ahead and bump or create a new provider that obviously has conflicts with the one that's already there. They have the same source or potentially a different version of the source, but different package object names. What this is doing is changing the way we name packages moving forward. That would be breaking for anyone who is updating from older versions, which is not a great situation. It would we'd be introducing more breakage while trying to reduce future breakage. But it seemed like a fine trade-off. But then in the back and forth here on this PR, you can see some discussion, which is what's going to be implemented and will be backwards compatible. We actually now check to see if there's a package that already exists with the source that's specified. So we get the lock and basically create a map of that. And if you've specified any packages in your home install, we check to see if they're already there. And if so, we use that existing object name and just update the source for that package. So anyway, that's kind of the strategy we're going to go with there. Because that is backwards compatible, we can actually do patches of all the active branches. Something to note with this is I would advocate, despite us being in code freeze right now, with being in code freeze, we already have a 1.6 branch, so 1.5 branch. So merging this will actually not put it in the 1.5 release. Since we are patching back to active release branches right now, I think it clearly makes sense to go ahead and include this in the 1.6 release as a bug fix. So that's kind of my 2 cents on it, but we will definitely have at least the patch releases. So yeah, should be a better experience for folks without breaking any existing workflows.
When you just said included 1.6 as a bug release, you mean 1.5, right?
Yeah, I misspoke.
Sounds good.
Cool.
And did you, did you have any concerns around, risk with like regression or experience or anything like that with this, or you felt pretty strong about, safely, doing a patch for it, and which is kind of before 1.5 actually goes out though?
I feel pretty good, mostly because I'm testing it really thoroughly, but also the nice thing about this is this feature and some of the revision controller, which actually basically manages the lock in your cluster, were developed somewhat in isolation. And what I'm doing is taking the same scheme we use to name things in a way that means that we will just update sources. And it's the same thing we do when we actually check for dependencies that have dependency ranges. I'm just reusing that machinery in the installer now. So it's not like the code paths that we're using haven't been exercised pretty frequently already. So that's also kind of like reinforcing my confidence and go ahead and including this.
Cool. That sounds good. And then also like around the case of somebody has 1.4 installed, they they have some packages installed, and then they install 1.5 with this change in it, and it doesn't have any impact on existing package names, etc., or breaking impact.
Yep, exactly.
Awesome. I don't have much doubt in you, Dan. I will say that. I never have.
Be careful.
All right. Okay, that sounds good. And thanks for keeping us updated on that one, Dan. So that's all core Crossplane related stuff. So I think we can move on down to the providers now. So I think there's a big update to be made around the TerraJet project. So Muaf, do you want to give us the TerraJet updates?
Yeah. So one of the big news is that we have cut the alpha releases of the 2 TerraJet providers, and they are fully XRM compliant, meaning you get references, late initialization, sensitive field handling, for both input and output connection details, and every good thing that people like about Crossplane providers. So that's the big news. And right now we have kept those providers to around 60 CRDs in order to get community feedback and let them try to break those resources and improve them. As you can see, the first release was actually 0.2.0, but now they are 0.2.4 and 0.2.2, which were released in response to the bugs that we cached. So yeah, I would like to invite everyone to use them, try them, test them, and report anything that they would like to be changed, or some bugs that they discover. So that's the big news, and it's the third bullet point, but I'll just get to that now. And right now we're planning to reach 200% coverage in the next 2 weeks for those 2 providers, meaning that AWS Terraform provider has 765 resource types. So that provider, TF AWS, will have 765 CRDs in the next 2 weeks. And for Azure, I think it's around 650 or something. So that has some implications in terms of scaling the API server. And we will we have some changes on the way, for Crossplane, and also in the long term, we're planning to patch up. We were planning to submit some upstream patches to the API server to handle that many CRDs. And Alper is driving the whole process there. But at the end of the next 2 weeks, we will have an option for people, like, by default, we will install like some number of CRDs, maybe like 100 or something, and you will be able to choose which API groups you would like to install, would like to be included in the installation using the provider object. That way you will be able to, like, you won't have to have a cluster with like 800 CRDs just to use like 10 of them. And that's like already a problem with native providers as well. For example, I remember a Slack message from a user that they were installing multiple providers and started to get client-side throttling for all of them because of the discovery client and how kubectl works and all that stuff. So it's like, we're kind of at the point that we're making it hard to process that many CRDs for API. So we're kind of like thinking of mitigations there. And the second thing is guide to add new resources available. So a lot of people ask, like, how can we get started with TerraJet and hit the ground and implement new resources, or in fact implement new providers using TerraJet. So we have added Hassan wrote a wonderful guide about how to add a new resource to provider TF AWS. So you can follow this, or just read it to see what it takes to include a resource. And we will have also in the next 2 weeks another guide that will let you create a TerraJet provider from scratch. For example, when people ask hey, do you have this provider, like Cloudflare provider, let's say, or OpenStack especially. So there will be a document that goes step by step. Hey, you need to use that template for a repository, and then take those steps to bootstrap the provider. Yeah, and then there are many small fixes that went into the release branches. So yeah, that's I think roughly the summary of where we are, and hopefully in the next community meeting we'll have even more stuff to announce.
For the and Alper, I guess for the PR that's open to filter the API groups that are deployed by a provider, can someone please open an issue that on Crossplane that describes the performance reasons for doing this? I saw the PR was open yesterday, and I personally have the context of, I think, what is motivating it happening at the moment, which is, like you said, that we're seeing discovery timeouts and things like that. But we've discussed, again, out of band on Slack and whatnot, we've discussed other potential alleviations for that discovery and the rate limiting of adding CRDs and whatnot. And then if you look at the PR that's open at the moment, it links back to issue 2122, which just talks about IRSA and wanting to break things down for security reasons. So I think it's a really well detailed PR from out there, which I appreciate. But the actual reason we're doing it right now is not super well captured. It kind of looks like we're doing it for authorization reasons, when in fact I think we're doing it for performance reasons. And I'd like to understand, given that we've also talked about some other options that might work, I'd like to understand whether we're going to do those options as well, increasing the discovery client side QPS and burst, and rate limiting the adding of APIs, all those kind of things. I kind of want to understand what our holistic approach is here, because this PR sounds a little bit like it also potentially relates to some of the stuff that Dan has talked about in the past about what's the word, sharding or provider config. So I just want to make sure that I know we're kind of in a hurry to really ship these TerraJet providers and not block ourselves, but I want to make sure we're working cohesively and we're sort of considering all of those different variables.
Yeah. So Nick, you are mentioning that we open a separate issue and probably link this open PR to that performance specific issue, right?
Yeah, that would be nice. I would probably my preference would be definitely if we just had an issue that was like, hey, we're seeing these performance issues when there are a lot of CRDs, and as well as linking to this issue, talked about some of those other options that we had, so that I could get an understanding of why we're doing this one first as a solution. Are there other solutions that will also do as well? Like the rate limiting and all that kind of thing. Because I could imagine that there are going to be some people who actually do want to have hundreds of CRDs and like have them available, and we're just like, you know, turning some off won't be an option for them, or would be a, you know, you can run other tools in this space without having to like disable parts of the API. So definitely be good to understand where we're going with this longer term.
Okay.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks for that, Alper. And yeah, I wanted to give a little shout out to Alper here for this effort here on like the thoroughness of the write-up here. I think it's you know, it helps to provide the context at least of what is enabled, what's the experience around this PR, and then also the testing of it as well too, to get a good sense of, you know, what's been covered and what the outcome of that was. So thanks a lot for doing that, Alper. I think that was good.
Yeah, definitely. It's a very it's something that people should take inspiration on when writing PRs. It's super handy to have you know, detailed user experience in the PR, and the detailed testing definitely helps review it and feel confident about it. Thank you.
Awesome. And then a quick question. This is probably a dumb idea, so I recognize that first. But in terms of the example YAMLs, is there any generation that can be done for those? Not necessarily like generating valid examples with good values that you can just apply and run, but like generating them, at least the schema of them, of like generating an example YAML with all the required fields so that it's easier for a human to come in and be like, okay, let me fill this field in with a value that makes sense to me as a human, and like it's kind of bootstrapping some of the example YAMLs. Does that make sense? Or I mean, that could be a little misleading and like not a good idea. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, Mafak, would you like to continue or should I jump in?
Yeah, we have an issue regarding like the generation of that example YAML, and will be on it. Yeah, but like the rough idea was that, like, you know, there are some repos in Terraform providers where they have like ETL files as an example. So like, you know, maybe one way could be like, you know, to convert those HTML to our YAML to use as an example, but I don't know, it's like, it's not like, you know, very common, like, you know, even like you see the examples in the documentation, but like they're not as like HTML files in some repo in some cases. So it's still like, you know, to be investigated, like you know, to see how we can do it. Like and Alper, like, you know, we'll be driving that.
I think like what Jared mentions also worth investigating further a bit. Like I think while building the schema of the resources, we actually have the context to set up some YAML file which doesn't have any value, but all keys for all required fields.
Keys.
Yeah, so like we can just dump them into example folder, and then like people can just fill the values, and we replace them with the filled values or tested values. I think that could be something done.
Yeah, maybe they could be like commented out in the beginning, and like, you know, have a statement up there, like, you know, hey, this is like, you know, the base YAML. When you test it in a working state, please remove the comments and, like, you know, commit it.
I could imagine maybe, yeah, like you probably got enough to like print out, you know, the skeleton scheme of the fields that are there. And you could probably also, if I'm not sure if we have these at the moment, do we have like doc strings for each particular field of any usefulness? Like saying in the Go code, do we get access to that, or is that just not in the upstream Terraform schema that we're using?
We have access. There's a field called description, but so far, like, you know, the providers that we work with, they don't fill that
right.
schema.
It's a shame. Otherwise, I was saying I was thinking you could actually just like put a comment above each field explaining what it is in the example as well. If we don't have that information, I guess we can't do that.
Yeah, we have an issue, like, you know, to investigate the documentation part. So at some point we will have those doc strings, so we can, like, you know, just copy the same thing into the YAML as well. Because, like, you know, after all, we will definitely need some documentation to show up in the doc CRDs there.
Awesome. Yeah, so it sounds like there's some possibilities then for bootstrapping or accelerating the effort around, you know, getting examples in as well. Obviously when people try out services for a first time, then, from the community, then contributing the example that they use to get to test it out, and is obviously really effective too. So that's great. Good. Okay, so I'm glad there's a couple different avenues there. So thanks for the updates on that, everybody. So we had a couple of releases since the last community meeting. Provider AWS 0.20 and the Provider Helm 0.9 are both published and released, and you can see the release notes here linked directly from the agenda doc. Let's see, quick time check. We're about halfway through the hour. So I think we just keep on moving along here. Let's get some quick updates then on the major cloud providers, and then we'll move on past that. So AWS, Aaron or Moaf, do you want to give a quick update there on some of the progress?
Yeah, I've added those bullet points so I can give a quick summary. So there are many incoming PRs to AWS. Some of them are like new resource PRs, as you can see, and some of them bug fixes and additions. One thing that I wanted to mention in this community meeting is that we're actively looking for new maintainers. So if you are interested in being a maintainer and provider AWS, we would definitely appreciate having you there, helping us review the PRs, because there are lots of PRs, and because we have the ACK code generation, the bar to add a new resource is pretty low, and the awesome community just keeps contributing, but in some cases we're not able to keep up with that pace in terms of reviewing. So I would like to call out for if you would like to be maintainer in that repo, please let us know, and yeah, that's all.
Speaking of which, Christopher, who's on the call, and I spoke yesterday, and he is interested in becoming a maintainer via AWS. So I haven't had a chance to actually respond to your Slack DM this morning yet, but I will. We'll get you set up.
Sweet. That is awesome. Yeah, and as Rafik was saying, that is a great way to get involved towards a maintainer path, is just adding reviews on PRs. You don't always have to contribute code immediately. Providing good and useful and insightful feedback is also another path towards becoming a maintainer. So that's always really, really helpful.
Yeah, definitely. We've totally seen folks, jump in and start, giving their feedback on, you can approve pull requests even if you're not part of the org. It just, isn't binding basically. And we tend to look for that, and we look for folks who've contributed a bunch, reviewed reviews wise, or just opened a bunch of pull requests, things like that. So totally, get involved. Typically, we will notice and be very eager to have you help us out.
Yeah, because it is quite appreciated. Absolutely. Aaron, is anything else that you wanted to add for AWS?
No, I think Nick and Mubafik have covered it.
All right, sounds good. Let's move on into GCP. So Hassan, do you want to get us updated on GCP?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we don't have much activity on provider GCP for the last 2 weeks, but we have a new maintainer. So I think Gabriel is already in the call, I guess. So I would like to thank thank you for all of your efforts, and really appreciate really happy to have you as a maintainer in provider GCP. I don't know if he wants to add something or not, but basically there is one new resource which is PubSub subscription, and also some other minor PRs merged. They are mostly fixes in readmes or examples, so I didn't list them here. Yeah, that's basically it for provider GCP.
I would like just to thank you back, because I was pretty happy to be part of this repository. I hope I can help you with reviewing and adding more resources. So thank you for calling me to help you.
Right on, Gabriel. Yeah, I'd love to see that effort there, and it's definitely helps move the project forward. There's no doubt about it. So thanks a lot. Awesome. And so Alper, do you want to give us a quick update then on Azure as well to round us out?
Hello. Yeah, so after the community push, we had done some initial reviews for the open PRs, and one of them is merged, which introduces a key vault secret managed resource. And another pull request has been opened in the last 2 weeks, which introduces a set of RBAC related resources like application, service principal, and some other resources. And we have had a chance to do the initial review for that. So those are the basic updates from the provider Azure side.
Awesome, thanks, Alper. It's been great that the attention we've been able to give providers and being able to keep things flowing there. So thanks everybody, all the maintainers, the effort on those ones. Okay, so that's everything for releases, core Crossplane, providers. So we can go down and move into the community topics section. So to start that one out, quick update on a whole bunch of content over the last couple of weeks since the last community meeting. A bunch of interesting articles, blogs, live streams, videos, etc., are now available for your consumption. I thought particularly interesting was the Crossplane versus Terraform one that Victor did with Anton. Victor, do you want to add a little color and insight into the experience on that one?
It was, I mean, I expected it to be a bigger clash, to be honest, because Anton is very, very, very Terraform focused person.
Yeah, he's a HashiCorp ambassador, right?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah.
So it was kind of very, I was very pleased when he himself was kind of, hey, actually, this is a good thing.
That's awesome.
Kind of, if Terraform ambassador is kind of impressed with Crossplane, then we are really doing something good.
That's cool. Yeah, that was particularly good. Between you two, that was like really good feeding off each other there. I like that a lot. At KubeCon, we did a Crossplane office hours, and the CNCF just last night sent along the recording for that session. A lot of really good questions from the community, and thank you everyone for helping out to answer those questions while we're moving along with presenting and managing all of that. A lot of engagement there. So I have the recording just last night, and I got permission from the CNCF to upload the recording to our Crossplane YouTube channel. So it'll be available there. I don't have a link yet, but once I upload it, it'll be on the main Crossplane YouTube channel.
Is it all office hours, or how many did we get?
So just the one that the CNCF itself ran.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the only one that we have access to here that I know of, at least. Yeah. And Victor did a lot of like 5 or 6 maybe office hours.
Nobody knows anymore.
Yeah, it was a large number, and so that was really cool. Seeing a lot of cool topics presented on, and engagement there too. So if we get recordings of those, then we should certainly publish those also. And then Dan did a interview with the new stack on about getting the project to incubation, which is available here. Any thoughts on that one, Dan? I didn't get a chance to. I didn't know that one had been published until I was just looking this morning, so I haven't seen that one yet.
Yeah, it was super fun. Obviously, Jared did most of the work around incubation, so I was just relaying the great work that you did. But it was cool to be interviewed alongside Constance and Ted, who are 2 pretty cool folks on the open telemetry side of things. And also just kind of like compare and contrast the experiences of the projects going to incubation and whatnot. So definitely cool to do.
Nice. They maybe should have, I saw the thumbnail on it, Dan, they maybe should have put you like 20 feet behind the other folks there so that the height was a little more leveled out.
Yeah, I was kind of close to the camera. It was it wasn't the best arrangement, maybe.
You're imposing. Awesome. Yeah, thanks for doing that, Dan, and thanks for being in LA and a lot of good experiences at KubeCon there. And then there's a couple publications, news articles about Crossplane recently too. There's one from Tech Target. Beth, I believe, is the author of that. She did pretty good insight and looked into some interesting things there. So kind of a different angle than you've normally seen write-ups on Crossplane. So that was pretty cool to see. Link is there. Dan did a fantastic blog post on his personal blog about packaging, basically packaging infrastructure, and software vendors can use packaging to deliver their software. Super interesting article to read there. And then VMware and Amazon both have blog posts referencing Crossplane and how to build platforms and solutions using it. So a lot of cool write-ups about Crossplane, a lot of cool stuff going on. We're getting adoption and traction outside of just our community here. So it's all really cool to see this content here. So feel free to peruse through those and catch up on the latest news and stuff. And then KubeCon North America was last week in LA, as we were just talking about there. Any experiences, observations, insights that folks wanted to share that were attending and participating?
I'll give a quick update. There was definitely some Crossplane fans there, which was super cool to see. To be honest, it was very different than other KubeCons in that it was mostly like maintainers and vendors there. So there wasn't a ton of like selling going on per se, which as an engineer, I obviously like that quite a bit. So there are some really cool opportunities to interact with other projects though, and think about different ways that we can partner. One conversation in particular that I really enjoyed was, and it's something we've actually talked about doing before, but was with Oliver Gold from Linkerd. He's the CTO over at Buoyant and a creator of the Linkerd project. And we had a pretty long conversation about their multi-cluster mesh kind of solution where you can put Linkerd in 2 separate clusters and have workloads in between them talk to each other. And he was mentioning that they have a lot of customers who say, oh, this is really cool. I'd like to be able to do this across geographical regions and that sort of thing. But like, it's kind of arduous because typically software is packaged in a way that it's meant to be installed into a single cluster. And obviously in this case, right, you have multiple clusters that this needs to go into each of them. So basically each time you're stamping it out, right, you want the cluster and then you want things inside of the cluster to be provisioned. And so I obviously thought that was a great use for Crossplane packages. And so it was cool to think about what it would look like to have a configuration package that did kind of stamp out Linkerd connected clusters. And that sounds like something we could definitely do a cool demo and actually have viable use cases of.
Yeah, very cool, Dan. Thanks for sharing that. I like that. Yeah, and then we also mentioned the office hours last week as part of KubeCon too. That continues to be one of my favorite experiences at KubeCon, where we get a lot of folks show up. There's a ton of really cool questions. Kind of makes us think about some of the things we've done in the project and connecting to new audiences and stuff. So I really, really like the office hours, and that continues to be one of my favorite parts of KubeCon now. So yeah, there were a couple talks at KubeCon also that were, and I don't know if the recordings are up yet. They may be already because they do that pretty darn quickly most of the time. But a couple talks that were kind of focused on Crossplane also. So Mauricio from VMware did a talk that kind of talking about a few different tools to be put together in the way that he envisions and wants to see software delivered now. So he really gets the idea of Crossplane and some of the vision there, and some of what Dan was talking about of delivering infrastructure with packages and things like that. So Mauricio gets it, and that's a really cool talk to get some of the deeper ideas and some of the things that are they're possible today. He's got a demo doing it, so it's not just vision. It's the kind of the higher levels that you can reach with Crossplane functionality. It's really cool. The Google folks also talked about various ways to provision and manage cloud provider resources with different tools in the ecosystem. And so they focused on Crossplane as the last tool in that arsenal there, and got into some of the more advanced functionality also. So that was a really good talk from them that put Crossplane in a fairly good light, I think. And it was really cool to see the Google folks talking about it like that. And then this one isn't specifically Crossplane focused, but it was a lot of like the lessons from some of the package manager and Go container registry stuff that we do. Dan, do you want to give a quick little update on the craziness of this this talk and demo real quick? Because I thought it was insane.
Sure. Yeah, this talk was mostly just about the OCI distribution spec, which is what so-called container registries adhere to, and kind of maybe debunking or just going into more depth about what's actually defined in the distribution spec and what isn't, most notably potentially. And so it's a pretty useful resource. I gave the talk with John Johnson, who helps run GCR over at Google. He has a wealth of knowledge in that as well. So there's some good things in there about how you can build your own registry, safe ways to use registries. There's some good conversation about pulling by digest and the dangers of like bit squatting and that sort of thing. So some really interesting stuff that I think is useful just organizationally for folks. And then we finished it up with a demo where we demonstrated what a registry that was acting as a chat server could look like. So you could basically just Docker run a container, and what that was doing was basically communicating back to the registry, and every message was actually appended as an upload that eventually on the next pull got compressed into a new layer. So then the next person who pulled the image, we dynamically append that layer onto the image and then serve it to them. So you'd get your whole chat history basically in the file system, and then you'd connect via WebSockets to actually do the chat operation. So it's kind of a fun thing if you're interested in kind of like misusing registries, if you will. But it also calls out to some of the decision making behind why Crossplane packages are the way that they are. A lot of folks will talk about OCI artifacts, which is kind of a common trend lately. We do not use OCI artifacts for Crossplane packages, and there's some justification and reasoning behind that presented that I think is fairly compelling. So it's worth a watch if you are super bored.
Yeah, I watched that talk in live, and my mind got exploded a little bit at the end when it's like instead of doing Q&A live, they just used the chat image to start doing Q&A, and the whole everyone in the talk was interacting off platform via running a container. It was really really interesting, really surprising too. So people went wild for that. It was really cool. So great job on that, Dan. That was pretty neat. Anything else on KubeCon or observations or experiences that anybody wants to share? All right, then we can go ahead and take a look-see down here at these other community-related topics. So I think this is, Gabriel, did you add this one on how can we add support for updates on identifier fields and managed resources?
Yeah, so I raised this issue because when I were developing some managed resources, there are some fields that are updatable in the API. For example, the name of the field of the resource. But for Crossplane, if I change the name, it doesn't behave as expected. For example, if I want to rename a GitHub repo, when Crossplane runs the first observe methods, it won't find the repo and create a new one because it will make a GET request with the new name and not the last name and change it later. So what I did was to work around for this issue was tracking the last name seen in the status. So I can try 2 GET requests. If the first one fails, I try with the status name. But I did it in some research in GCP, and Hassan said to me that I should not rely on status for the CRG. So I was trying to find another way to work around this. So how can I update, for example, the name of the resource without needing to rely on the status of the CRG? and then I tried to propose a second workaround. So, but I don't know if it's good. And is my comments below there, and I said to add an annotation, for example, last seen name or something like this, so I can rely on the annotation and not the status. But I don't know if it's a good solution, and I would love to see your inputs.
Yeah, yeah, Jared, I would just like to add, like, I also put another issue next to it, which was a recent issue in TerraJet, but like based on the discussions we had, it looks like this is not something TerraJet specific, and it is quite related what Gabriel is asking. Basically, it's a similar scenario. Like you have a, for example, you know, let's say you have a VPC, and then you have an external name assigned, and you go and delete that VPC from the like provider, and then Crossplane creates a new VPC, but you have an old external name, and external names never updated. So I felt like this is like related, so I just wanted to mention before we dive into more discussion.
Yeah, and if I recall correctly, that I believe Nick was mentioning somewhere. I don't know what format it was in, but Nick was mentioning recently, maybe it was Nick, about external names being immutable, or potentially enforcing it down that path instead of explicitly allowing them to change, but explicitly preventing them from changing. So I think this is a broader topic. I think there's a lot of weird implications of supporting it in scenarios that you might not have the right information to make an informed decision. But I myself am not completely up to date on that. So maybe Nick, you had some more insight there too.
Sorry, folks, I'm kind of half paying attention while reviewing other documents at the moment, but I think in many cases, external names tie to the external identifier in the cloud, and they often just are, like at the cloud or at the API that we're abstracting, they just are immutable. Obviously, that's not the case 100% of the time. But yeah, renaming is a little tricky, right? Because if we have the name of the thing and you say, hey, change the name of the thing, then we would need to somehow remember the old name for a while until we knew that name had changed. So I definitely think that this is something that warrants, an issue to discuss, or warrants further discussion before we figure out what we want to do with it. Apologies for that vague input. I'm kind of not up to speed with where the thoughts are at the moment.
It might be, it seems to me like this is a place where we're violating the basic idea of Crossplane. We are allowing someone to directly edit the field that we store the state in. And instead, we need to figure out a way for them to communicate that they want a state change in the spec of the document or in somewhere in the resource that is not editing the actual state field that we use to track these objects. Like, we're asking for a change by directly editing the state. And that's something that we should not do.
Yeah.
Also, if you, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Alper.
Go ahead. I was going to give an example from, how Terraform does this thing. So in a similar scenario, let's assume that you have a Terraform configuration, and either by importing or, just applying the configuration, you create a new resource or import an existing one, whatever. And the association between the cloud resource and the configuration entity is stored in the Terraform state, right? And if you delete the resource, cloud resource, and then you need to reassociate, a renamed one or, another entity. So, by running an import and something similar. So in our case, for example, if you do something like that, if the cloud resource is modified, with an entity other than Crossplane, then that reassociation, updating the external name, should also be done manually, right?
Yeah.
But I
yeah.
believe that the idea here is that the person is trying to rename the resource and the resource is becoming orphaned because the only mechanism that we're surfacing for a rename is the same field that stores the state of the object. Do I have that correct?
Yeah, so in my opinion, the renaming feature, I kind of think of like now closer to how the actual like in the beginning we have the reason we have like one of the reasons we have external name is to make the resource identification and association as close as possible to the Kubernetes API object, which is a custom resource. So that's why, like for example, by default we always default to metadata.name of the CR to the external name. So from that perspective, I am kind of like leaning towards having users recreate the whole object if they want to change the identifier. For example, let's say in deployment that it creates like pods when you can't really change the name of the deployment or pod, but if you would like to like create a new pod, like any change essentially triggers a new creation of a new resource and with a new name and all that stuff. So it feels like if we have people recreate the resource if they want to like rename something, that would be like closer to how like Kubernetes sees the resources at a high level. And at a low level, from technical perspective, I think it's really hard to be able to capture the renaming stuff because there are also references that are resolved one time. And also it's really hard to like, for example, let's say 10 resources reference to a single one. And when you rename it, the whole thing changes. And some of them are like, references are immutable. So like the whole graph of the resources is affected. So I would kind of lean towards like, having people recreate the whole resource if they need to change the external name for one reason or another.
Yeah, it's kind of tricky. It seems like, sorry, I'm catching up with this now and reading the actual issue that Gabriel raised. My guess is that this case where an API even lets you change its unique identifier is pretty rare. It sounds like this does happen for resource record set in DNS, Google GCP DNS, and it looks like, looking at the API, what happens is the name of the record set is part of the URL, but then you can do a patch to that URL, including the name that changes the name. So presumably that would be, the URL would then change. And if you tried to repeat that, it wouldn't be idempotent, right? If you tried to do it again, it would fail and say it succeeded the first time, and now the URL isn't there anymore because the name has changed. So, to Muvaf's point, if we just try and like copy Kubernetes semantics, you just can't change the metadata.name of a resource. That's not allowed. But then we end up putting an artificial constraint on this edge case of API where we'd say you just can't change the name of a resource record set in place, even though you technically could with the API. So I think similar to what Alper was getting at, if you look at how Terraform handles this, they have both the ID field and then also a field that usually just duplicates the ID, if I understand correctly. So they'll have and the ID is not exposed to users. It's not part of the like user facing schema. It's an internal tracking thing in the state, right? So I don't know, like one alternative, if we were like fully rethinking external names, would be to go to a similar model to Terraform where we just duplicate that, where there's both like a name field that is the declared state of what you want the name to be, which in 99 cases out of 100, you would not ever, it would be immutable basically. And then there would be the, external name or external ID field, which was like what it actually is at the moment. So we could, potentially decouple those. I'm a little on the fence about like, I kind of want to find whether there's, how many more cases there are where like this is actually possible before I'd, want to fundamentally change how external names work to handle this case personally.
For example, in my company, we are developing a provider for Azure DevOps, and every resource there supports the update for the name. So for every managed resource we do this rely on the status. That's one of the problems if you want to give this provider to the community, because we would need to change all of the managed resource that we already developed, and we would need to change it and like remove the feature to rename the resource. And it feels like the Crossplane is always trying to reflect the API, but in this case, I think it's bad because you are just removing a feature that the API has, is to rename the resource, and we are removing this because of the limitation of this model. I was trying to find another way to support both cases, not like breaking everything from Crossplane. As you said, like if we need to do like Terraform that has the ID for Terraform and the ID for the API separate, so it won't have this problem. But I think we can try to, as I propose, maybe some annotation for this. I don't know if it's too bad. I was just trying to find the middle, the case that won't break anything for Crossplane and won't remove the feature to rename some resources.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, to be fair, I think what you just described is how it actually is today, that we are, for a subset of APIs, not supporting a feature. But just to be clear, that wasn't a conscious decision that we made. It was more of a, we've never run into use cases until now where you could change an external name in flight. A lot of the time, there are resources where you can change the name or the human presented name, right? But then they also have some kind of identifier like a ARN or something like that. That's actually what uniquely identifies them, that you look them up by. So if you could just drop a comment about that Azure DevOps use case on your issue as well, Gabriel, that'd be just handy to have, more supporting data that, it's not just resource record set, and that there are, other cases where that exists. That would be handy. I feel like, we have managed resources for SQL databases, and I feel like those are renameable as well. So that's another potential.
But forgive me if I'm missing something, but in those cases, wouldn't then the name just be a field in the spec, which is mutable, and it should not, like, you shouldn't be relying on, you shouldn't change external name, which is supposed to be like an immutable identifier for a particular object. You should change the spec, and then your provider should reconcile those two. So if the provider recognized a difference between the requested name and the actual name, it could then handle the logic of juggling them. So instead of adding a field to status, you're adding a field to spec.
We don't typically duplicate the external name. The external name does like a lot of heavy lifting, right? The half remembered history here from years ago was that originally we actually were inconsistent. We had some resources that just took the metadata.name of the Kubernetes resource and used that to name, the GKE cluster or the record set or whatever. And obviously that metadata.name is just fundamentally immutable. You can't change that. We didn't have a choice there. But then we had other resources that just added like a name field to spec. I know Bucket was one of them commonly, right? That just had like a name field in the spec. And at that time we had resource claims working a different way. And we'd often run into issues where like we wanted to automatically generate like a GCP bucket or an S3 bucket or something like that. You had to like somehow set like the name field in the spec. And it also just like wasn't predictable. Like it wasn't, the name field wasn't in the same place every time. Everyone had to go and like read for each managed resource, find out which field was the name. And then furthermore, we had this case with a lot of AWS resources in particular, and just in general out there in the world, there's a lot of APIs that just like don't give you a choice what the name is, that you create the thing and then they just tell you, okay, its unique identifier is this. So it's not an input, it's an output that you have to capture. So we tried to address all of this by adding that external name annotation, and we explicitly removed the name from the spec. So most well-formed or compliant Kubernetes Crossplane resources rather don't have an external name annotation and also a name in the spec at the moment. They just have the external name annotation, and we use that to set the name. So, maybe that was a misstep, and maybe we should have the name as well, but there will be issues with that. As I just described, that like folks want to set that name or influence that, it'll be tough to do it. most people kind of, my bet was that most people kind of just want the name to be set to the same thing as the Kubernetes name, like in the common case, which can be done easily with the external name annotation, but harder if you've got it as some arbitrary field we've got to go set.
Yeah.
So yeah, there isn't a great way to do this at the moment. I think, you know, the lowest touch would be kind of what Gabriel was saying, right? Which would be, I don't know, maybe we add another annotation, which is like, you know, Crossplane value / change my external name or something like that, or new external name, right? And that way we have the state required to do what we would need to do. So, you know, even if we lose everything else, we have something tracking the old external name is here and the new external name should be this, so then we can align them, sort of thing. But,
yes, but what I was trying to propose is not the user to define a new annotation, but the operator itself is going to create the annotation transparent for the user. So if I do a GET request successfully, I will save this last seen name in annotation, and then if I try to make another GET request in the future that fails, I will try again with the last one. So if the first fails and the second one succeeds, it means that the first one is actually the new name that the user wants. So I will rename the resource with the fails name, you know, because if you add new annotation for the user to fill, I think it's going to be a better experience for them. But if we do this invisible for them, it's going to be like they won't even see this happening because it's just handled by the cross-plane operator itself.
maybe we would have to, with the implementation of the managed resource reconciler, I don't think there'd be a way to do this transparently, because like you say, we would have, well, can't see a way to do this without doing updates to like every controller, right? Because they would then need to have the logic to try the external name annotation to get the thing, and then if that fails, then try again with like the backup external name annotation, or, you know, the sort of last observed name. Yeah, this strikes. I don't have a chilling effect on this conversation, but it strikes me as something that we're probably not going to come up with a really good design on this call for it, sort of thing.
Yes. What I'm trying to do is, because this provider with Azure DevOps is private for now, I will try to do it public and share with you the implementation, so you can see what we are doing now to work around this issue, and maybe it can get some insights for new proposals to resolve this.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'd like to understand again, Azure DevOps resource record set, like what kind of a priority this is, sort of thing, because I think anything we do with external name, while what you proposed is, probably the least impacting, most sort of transparent thing. Anything we like, external identity is like a pretty core part of Crossplane, right? So it's something I want to be very careful about making any changes to, but I guess is where I'm going with here.
Okay.
Yeah,
it's not a super feature that we need right now. It's just a issue that I raised to discuss.
Nice.
I would ask, like, like right now, I think there is no way to change the external name in return to update method, right? Because there is no such a field like we have in create, like external name changed or something like that. Like if we add that field and for those edge case resources, if we have, for example, a spec.name, so that the controller itself can return if it changes the updated external name. So do you think that would affect like the existing resource? I think it wouldn't affect the existing resources, but yeah, I'm thinking like this could be maybe a solution.
Yeah, maybe, but I guess what I'm saying here is like, this is like a fundamental change to the XRM, right? So if we're going to say all resources need a spec.name now as well as a spec.external name, that change warrants at least a design document to make it happen, sort of thing. So I'd like
Yeah.
to push. I'd like to maybe take this conversation and maybe move it into more of a one pager or speculation there. There was a reason historically, like we thought about having spec.name, I believe, and we ended up going with an annotation. I forget why. So there's probably like a lot of history we can pull together. Aaron just DM'd me, and I think Move just shared an issue that was an existing discussion about what we want to do with external name. And again, there's an issue with, so we can find where we like invented external name in the first place. Then we can sort of take all of that input and see if we want to make a change there.
Makes sense.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, thanks for bringing this up at the first place, Gabriel. And it definitely does require some more deeper discussion. We got into some of it right now in this meeting, so that was a good start at it. So we can keep following up offline or into GitHub issues or get to a one pager or whatever it may be. Right, sweet. So we're a bit over time now. So let's go ahead and wrap it up then for the day. And so yeah, thanks for everybody joining in and all the updates and the engagement here, and definitely appreciate it. And we'll keep everything continuing on GitHub and Slack. Thanks everybody. See ya.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.